Dawn breaks over the Ardennes forest on May 10, 1940. A low rumble builds, not from thunder, but from engines. Hundreds of them. German panzers, monsters of steel, are moving through terrain deemed impassable. Their speed is not just surprising, it is physiologically impossible. Men march 25 miles a day, then fight through the night. Commanders operate for 50 hours without rest. The French High Command is paralyzed, maps rendered useless by the hour. The British Expeditionary Force is reeling backward, toward the sea at Dunkirk. This is the Blitzkrieg, a storm of violence that appears superhuman. And in a very real sense, it was. What happens when an army decides to chemically rewrite the limits of human endurance? This is not a question of morality, but of raw, tactical calculation. The German spearhead in 1940 was running on methamphetamine. Millions of tablets of Pervitin were issued, concentrated in the mechanized divisions and Luftwaffe bomber crews. This was not recreational, it was logistical. The drug suppressed fear, erased exhaustion, and maintained aggression against impossible odds. For 3 days, the spearhead never stopped. They shattered the French command cycle because they operated outside the human cycle of sleep and recovery. But chemistry demands payment. By 1941, the cost emerged: addiction, psychosis, heart failure. The chemical edge faded, leaving behind hollowed-out men. The early advantage was real, but it was also a Faustian bargain, a short-term surge that masked deeper systemic truths. The real German secret was not in a pill, but in a principle. Auftrags tactic. Mission-type tactics. A German lieutenant was told what to achieve, never how to achieve it. If a bridge was blown, he found a crossing. If a flank was exposed, he attacked it. No radio call to headquarters for permission. This decentralized command created a terrifying adaptability. Their infantry squad was a machine built around another machine, the MG-34, and later the terrifying MG-42, with a rate of fire that tore the air like fabric. The entire squad existed to feed and protect that gun. They were tactically brilliant, and man for man, they would remain the most lethally efficient infantry of the war. A cold analysis of combat data shows that even when outnumbered and losing, German units consistently inflicted 50% more casualties than they suffered. But wars are not won man for man, they are won by nations. And in 1941, Germany turned east and met a nation whose capacity for suffering and regeneration defied all their calculations. The opening act on the Eastern Front was a catastrophe of historic scale. In 6 months, the Red Army lost 4 million men. Entire armies vanished into German encirclements. Stalin's pre-war purges had decapitated the officer corps, leaving leaders who were loyal but terrified, incapable of initiative. Soviet tactics were rigid, human waves hurled against German machine guns. Yet from this abyss, an entirely new army was forged. The learning curve was paid in blood, but it was learned. They abandoned rigidity for operational artistry. They mastered maskirovka, deception on a grand scale. Entire tank armies moved at night, appearing where they were least expected. They implemented deep battle, a doctrine of simultaneous attacks across the entire depth of the enemy defense, overwhelming not just the front line, but the reserves, the supply dumps, the command posts. The squad evolved, centering on the robust DP-27 machine gun and mass-produced PPSH-41 submachine guns, ideal for the brutal close-quarters fighting of Stalingrad and Berlin. But the true instrument of Soviet victory was artillery. At the Battle of Berlin, they concentrated over 250 guns per kilometer. On the first day, over 1 million shells fell. It was not precision. It was the physics of annihilation. By 1945, the Red Army was not just experienced, it was hardened in a furnace of loss and vengeance. They had traded space for time and men for mastery, and emerged as the most battle-hardened juggernaut in the world. Facing Germany from the west was an army built on a fundamentally different principle: the absolute substitution of machinery for manpower. The American philosophy was stark. Don't send men where you can send steel. While most infantrymen of the world still carried bolt-action rifles, every American GI carried the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic rifle that could fire as fast as a man could pull the trigger. The psychological impact on German troops in Normandy was profound. They reported being drowned in fire. But the rifle was just the tip of the spear. The true American weapon was a system, the Fire Direction Center. A single forward observer could call down the coordinated fire of an entire battalion of artillery, with shells timed to land in a devastating simultaneous crash, the time-on-target mission. Later, they introduced the proximity fuse, a shell with a tiny radar that detonated it in the air above trenches, raining down shrapnel. This was supported by an industrial and logistical engine unlike anything ever seen. The United States didn't just produce weapons, it produced abundance. The Red Ball Express, a relentless convoy system, kept the advance fueled. German panzers were often immobilized out of gas. American tanks were not. This was not tactical genius, it was systemic supremacy. American infantry, green in 1942, learned quickly. They never needed to match the German soldier in individual tactical prowess. Their system ensured they didn't have to. In a war of attrition, logistics is the ultimate tactic. For the British Army, the war was fought under a single grim constraint. They could not afford to lose. The memory of the Somme and Passchendaele from the First World War, where a generation was bled white, dictated every decision. British doctrine became an exercise in meticulous set-piece battle. Their strength was precision under pressure. Training was brutally realistic, with live fire over soldiers' heads to inoculate them against panic. Advances were deliberate, objectives limited and consolidated. Their combined arms coordination was superb. Infantry moved with specialized tanks to clear obstacles, all under a carefully timed artillery blanket. The Brennlight machine gun was arguably the finest of its class, accurate and reliable, the cornerstone of their squads. But this methodical approach came at a cost. It was slow. Commanders like Montgomery were criticized for caution, but this was a strategic necessity. Britain, with its limited manpower, could not recover from massive losses. They fought smart because they could not afford to fight simply hard. And then there was the army that rejected all these models, of logistics, of combined arms, of conservation. The Imperial Japanese Army was built on a spiritual core, the absolute primacy of will over matter. Surrender was not an option, it was a permanent stain on one's family and emperor. This was not mere propaganda, but a belief system that produced staggering levels of sacrifice. On islands like Tarawa and Iwo Jima, casualty rates approached 99%. Early Japanese tactics of night infiltration and frenzied banzai charges were effective against unprepared foes. But against American firepower, they became suicidal. To their credit, Japanese commanders adapted. On Iwo Jima, General Kuribayashi engineered a defense in depth, a network of tunnels and bunkers designed to negate American naval bombardment and force a war of brutal, yard-by-yard attrition. Yet their system had fatal flaws. Their industrial base was a fraction of America's. Their rifles were adequate, but their machine guns were prone to jamming. They largely ignored the submachine gun. While brave beyond question, Japanese infantry often found themselves facing a storm of automatic fire from American Garands, Thompsons, and Bars, with nothing but bolt-action rifles and sheer resolve. Willpower could not stop a flamethrower. Faith could not intercept a naval shell. Their system, for all its ferocity, could not overcome industrial physics. So, which system was best? The answer lies in what you mean by best. If you mean the most tactically proficient soldier on the battlefield, the evidence points to the German Lanzer, empowered by decentralized command and ruthless efficiency. But he lost. The war was ultimately decided not in the foxhole, but in the factory and the oil field. The German system optimized for tactical victory. The Allied systems, particularly the American and Soviet, were built for strategic endurance. One produced better fighters. The others produced more bullets, more tanks, more fuel, and crucially, more time for their fighters to learn. The echo that resonates from this analysis is a cold one. In total war between industrial powers, brilliance at the small unit level can win battles, but it cannot compensate for a fatal deficit in resources, logistics, and time. The Wehrmacht's tragedy was to be perhaps the finest tactical instrument of the century, wielded by a regime that guaranteed its strategic destruction. The Allies' triumph was to create machines of war that could absorb tragedy, learn from disaster, and ultimately drown the enemy in the relentless tide of production and population. The best army was the one whose nation could sustain it the longest. In the end, the story of these 5 armies is the story of 5 different answers to the same terrible question. What is a life worth on the battlefield? For the Germans, it was a tactical asset to be enhanced. For the Soviets, it was a currency to be spent. For the Americans, it was something to be protected by a mountain of steel. For the British, it was a precious heirloom from a past tragedy. For the Japanese, it was a sacrament to be offered. Their answers shaped their fighting styles and their fates. This was Echoes of World War II. If these stories of strategy and consequence resonate with you, consider subscribing to the History Vault for more. We leave the simpler narratives for others.